Victor, we can't talk about punters in the 1980s on racecourses without talking about Terry Ramsden. Now, did you have much dealings with him?
Quite a lot. He came to me a bit later than he came to Ladbrokes and a few of the other private bookmakers. But he still gave me plenty of business through an agent of his called Bobby Cox, who was a butcher. And I happened to know because he supplied the meat at Walthamstow Stadium, and his son was a friend of mine who at that time had just finished driving one of the minis in the film with Michael Caine, the Italian Job, strangely enough. And anyway, we had a relationship, and he would be putting on Yankees and Super Yankees and God knows what every morning for Terry, and splitting them up all through the bookmakers, because most of them came to, if they won, would have come to more than anyone's limit, Ladbrokes Hills or us. So, Terry wanted to win the world in one go. Another one that you just wrote down the bets and hoped, because overall, he wouldn't just have bets in every race at one meeting. It would be every meeting in the country every day. The more races there were, the more bets he had. And I think it was a hobby because he was making so much money at the time. I know he thought it didn't matter. Perhaps latterly, when things went slightly wrong for him, he probably wished that he hadn't squandered, enjoyed, I don't know, the money he lost. But he certainly was a character, and you knew when he'd arrived at a racecourse with the helicopter and all those, and the bodyguards and the fanfare that preceded him. But we rarely see characters like him on the racecourse.
Okay, now my card marker tells me that the Dawn Run winning the Gold Cup in '86 was one of your costliest ever races. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you put into perspective what a big bet is to anybody, or a big loss for a bookmaker, a big loss is a lot less if you've got a small pot rather than a big pot. But even this, when I'd hopefully in those days built up quite a big pot to be able to, I'd risked too much because I was opinionated and I'd seen it fall at Cheltenham, and I thought it was hyped too much, and I was wrong. And I thought I was right coming to the last, and I was wrong. And lastly, I bought a signed photograph, a photograph signed by John O'Neill. Then I bought his boots and whip that he used during the race, and I put them in a frame, and it reminded me not to be pig-headed. That's all.
I mean, how, without going into figures, how over and above your normal maximum would you have stood that?
Over double, yeah.
Double maximum.
Very silly.
So was that purely your opinion, or did your card markers all agree? And you?
It was a matter of circumstances, really. I got to where I wanted to in the book, and then one of my bigger punters had a huge bet at the last minute. So it wasn't all pig-headedness, but I could have backed it back. That's all I think. I know that I could have. I made that split-second decision to, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. Not a good decision ever.
Now, as well as Cheltenham, you love Aintree. Have you got any particular fond memories of the Grand National meeting?
I've got loads, because there always seemed to be some incident at Aintree, and obviously all these meetings I travelled with. Alan King and I shared a driver, because neither of us were very good drivers. And both of us, used to work in the car, and Alan used to do the crossword because he was less interested in racing than I was. But we went up there for many years together, and there was one occasion, one year we always used to stay at Southport to try and avoid Liverpool. It was an easier drive in and less hassle, because Liverpool wasn't the most pleasant place in the 80s, early 90s. And we arrived in Southport the evening before the first day, and there were 8-10 police cars. There was some sort of riot in a cafe, and there were things being thrown and punch-ups happening and all that. So we thought, we won't go out tonight. And anyway, we did go out later on. But the riot was opposite our hotel, and it seemed to go on for an hour and a half with the policemen getting hit over the head and certain rioters getting hurt. I never did find out what it was all about, but it was typical. And that evening we went out to supper with a few people, and we were walking back, and a gang of young kids in their early teens ran past us with rocks, and there's an arcade along the main street in Southport, and they seemed intent on smashing every window as they went along. So we, this was a pleasant evening. So we went home to bed. In the morning, I think Stephen Little was the first one to notice it, that his cash was missing from his bedroom, and it was tens of thousands of pounds. Alan woke up and had his briefcase taken with not quite so much in it, but enough to hurt. I was lucky because Bobby Edwards, who used to be the floor man, had put most of our cash in the hotel safe. But I did have a banker's draft for 25,000 stolen, plus all the punts. I'd kept the punts separately to the other. Anyway, we thought. So we all conferred in the lounge of the hotel. The police arrived, and the policeman was a police constable, two of them actually, who looked about 12. And we said, we related the story, and it was me that said to him, "Is there someone more senior that could come along and, deal with this?" He said, "Oh no, sir." He said, "All the senior police are on the beach. That we've just found a body." I thought, I just want to get out of this place.
So did they actually come into your rooms when you were asleep at it?
Yes.
Terrifying. Okay, something a bit more cheerful. You've been an owner. Are still an owner of horses?
Yeah, I've got one with Alan King at the moment.
So you've obviously had success at Cheltenham. Men in Our Position was the group name for the syndicate?
Yeah, that came about because one of the members of the syndicate, Malcolm Kane, we used to tease because he was occasionally slightly pompous, and he had uttered the phrase, "Well, men in our position," and when we all, sort of creased up in laughter at this pomposity, so we did. But it was a tease on Malcolm, who had a share in Zaynar, that went on to win the Triumph Hurdle. It was great fun to be with a lot of friends.
And did you see things as an owner? Did you see things in a different sort of way? Did it change your attitude to bookmaking a bit? Yeah,
I think so. But I loved owning. Like most owners, I don't think I really profited, and there's lots of horses that didn't reach the race course or didn't run well. All owners' geese are swans, not swans, are they? Most of them are. Had a couple of good horses that had accidents on the way. I had a horse that Mick Easterby thought would go very well in the Grand National, that had its prep race and died of a heart attack coming over the last while in front. I had a second in the Kinmure that jumped the last in front, called Murano. That was a gift from Charles St George, actually. But overall, and I had one good horse in America, that Vievine, that I bought in France with Ian Fry used to own horse racing abroad that did all the trips, and that did. And I'm talking about in the early 80s. Stuart Cargie, who'd have been a jump jockey, who trains in France now, found it for us. And then, I mean, this is how good he was. He said, this will win on the dirt in America. Don't keep it in France. So we sent it to America. And it won $1 million in prize money in the early 80s, which was pretty fantastic and great fun. And the only time I went to see it run, it got beaten, and it won 7 times. So it wasn't very.
Have you got sort of any ambitions with owning horses for the future?
I think if I go back to England, I'd like to be able to visit the horses and see them. I've just dipped my toe in the water again after a few years. I did have a share in a couple with Gordon Elliott about a few years ago, neither of which turned out to be any good. That was my last venture, other than a couple of horses running in Spain. So I think we have intentions of moving back to England from Gibraltar / Spain in the next year or so, or possibly sooner, and then I'd probably get interested in it again. I still ride, so I like being around horses.